The projector clicked on and my chest tightened. That was my report on the screen, the one I'd spent 3 months perfecting for the quarterly review. Except the numbers were wrong. Revenue projections I'd never written stared back at me in bold red text, showing a 40% loss instead of the 40% gain I'd documented. Colin Drake, the VP of Operations, stood beside the screen with his arms crossed, his face a perfect mask of disappointment. "Mara," he said slowly, shaking his head. "This is exactly the kind of carelessness we can't afford at the director level." The boardroom felt smaller suddenly. Senior executives shifted in their chairs. I opened my mouth to protest, but nothing came out. My hands gripped the table edge as Colin clicked to the next slide, showing expense calculations that made me look like I couldn't add basic numbers. Someone coughed. Another executive closed their laptop with a quiet snap that sounded like a verdict. Then I saw it. Bottom right corner. The file timestamp showed it was last modified 2 days ago at 11:47 p.m. I'd submitted my final version 3 weeks earlier. My heart stopped racing and started calculating instead. I stumbled into the hallway, my heels echoing against the marble floor. Behind me, muffled voices continued the meeting without pause, probably discussing my incompetence. 2 colleagues from marketing walked past, their eyes darting away from mine like I carried something contagious. Nobody wanted to be associated with failure. "I'm sorry, Mara," whispered Keisha from accounting, touching my shoulder briefly before hurrying away. The bathroom mirror showed mascara smudges under my eyes. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to think clearly. Colin appeared behind me in the reflection, his expression dripping with fake sympathy. "You should have double-checked your data," he said softly, adjusting his tie. "These mistakes happen when people rush for promotions they're not ready for." My hands shook as I dried them, but not from fear. From rage. Pure, crystallizing rage that sharpened every thought into focus. That night, sitting at my kitchen table with lukewarm coffee, I reopened my archived project files. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, organized by date and version number. Except one folder labeled final_board_submission was completely missing. I checked the system logs 3 times, certain I was reading them wrong. The deletion timestamp glowed on my screen, March 15th, 9:23 a.m. But the deletion didn't come from my account. The username attached to the action was C. Drake. Colin Drake. My VP had accessed my shared drive and erased my original work. I took screenshots of everything, my fingers trembling as I clicked. File properties, access logs, modification history. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop into my shoes. My HR employee portal had updated overnight. A new flag appeared on my performance record. Performance concern, data accuracy issues. They weren't just sabotaging my promotion. They were building a paper trail to fire me. Or worse, force me to quit before anyone asked questions. I sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my apartment. The quiet humming of my laptop felt like the only sound in the entire world. Then I leaned forward and created a new folder on my desktop. I named it Evidence. Renee Martinez worked as a project coordinator on Colin's team before transferring to sales. We'd bonded over terrible office coffee and shared frustration with pointless meetings. I texted her asking to meet, keeping it casual. She suggested a cafe 3 blocks from the office, the kind of place where nobody from work ever went. She arrived 10 minutes late, scanning the entrance like she expected someone to follow her. Her hands wrapped around her coffee cup too tightly. "You're not the first," she said before I could even explain why we were meeting. He did the same thing to Mark in logistics last year. Altered his budget reports, made him look reckless. Mark took the settlement and signed an NDA. My throat felt dry. Why didn't anyone warn me? Because people are scared. She glanced at the door again. Colin's connected. He gets results. The board loves him. Then she pulled a small USB drive from her purse and slid it across the table. He forgets to clear local backups on the shared server. I saved what I could before I transferred. The bell above the cafe door chimed. Renee's face went pale. Colin walked in, ordering at the counter. He turned, spotted me, and smiled like we'd run into each other by accident. Renee was already gone. The next morning, my desk phone rang at 8:47 a.m. HR wanted to see me immediately. I grabbed my laptop, slipping the USB drive into my jacket sleeve as I walked down the sterile, white hallway to their office. The HR manager, Patricia Ewan, sat across from me with a manila folder already open. Collins sat beside her. "Mara, we need to discuss some concerns about your recent performance," Patricia began, her voice professionally sympathetic. Colin jumped in smoothly. "We want to help you improve, but we need transparency. Any challenges you're facing, workload issues, anything affecting your accuracy?" Every word felt rehearsed. His concerned expression was so polished it looked practiced in a mirror. They asked about my methodology, my sources, my verification process. Then Patricia slid a form across the desk. "We'll need to hold your work laptop for a technical audit. Standard procedure." I handed it over, feeling the USB drive press against my wrist. Colin's eyes followed my movements, lingering a half-second too long. He knew I wasn't giving up. And now I knew he knew. I didn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I plugged Renee's USB into my personal laptop, my bedroom lit only by the screen's glow. My breath caught as folders appeared. Everything was there. My original reports, untouched and pristine, with verified timestamps showing I'd completed them weeks before the board meeting. Every number Colin had altered was visible in direct comparison. But there was more. Hidden in a subfolder were metadata files showing Colin had accessed my account 17 times over 3 months. Weekend logins. Late-night edits. He hadn't just sabotaged me once. He'd been systematically undermining my work for months, adjusting figures here, deleting recommendations there, building toward this public humiliation. I had proof of the act, but I needed proof of intent. Why would a VP sabotage his own employee? I pulled up the company organizational chart. Then I saw it. The director position I was competing for reported directly to the CEO, not to Colin. If I got promoted, I'd be outside his control. I'd be his equal. And based on performance metrics, I'd make him look average by comparison. The IT office sat in the basement, surrounded by server racks that hummed like mechanical bees. I'd brought coffee for Jude Park, the systems engineer who'd once helped me recover a corrupted file. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of person who noticed everything but said little. "I need a favor," I said, setting the coffee on his desk. "Security camera logs for the 3rd floor. Specifically March 13th through 15th, after-hours access." Jude's eyes narrowed. "That's not really my department." "I know. But you have access to the security database. I just need to know who entered the office late at night during those dates." "I know. But you have access to the security database. I just need to know who entered the office late at night during those dates." He hesitated, fingers drumming against his keyboard. Then he sighed and pulled up the system. We watched grainy footage fast-forward through empty hallways until a figure appeared. The timestamp read March 14th, 11:47 p.m. Colin Drake, using his keycard, entering the office floor. He walked straight to the shared workstation area, sat down, and stayed for 43 minutes. Jude's face went pale. "Mara, if he finds out I showed you this." "He won't," I promised. But the guilt on Jude's face told me he'd seen this pattern before and stayed silent. The email arrived the next afternoon, sent from a generic account with no signature. "Stop digging, or we'll make sure you never work again." The phrasing was too polished, too passive-aggressive. Colin's writing style, trying to sound anonymous. I read it 3 times, feeling cold sweat on my palms. Then the anger returned, hotter than before. He was scared, which meant I was close to something he desperately wanted to stay buried. I set up an encrypted cloud account under the name Phoenix_Archive and uploaded everything. The original reports, the access logs, the CCTV footage Jude had copied for me, the threatening email. If anything happened to me, if I got fired or forced out, this evidence would still exist beyond their reach. That night, I barely touched dinner. My roommate asked if I was okay. I just nodded, staring at my phone. The fear was real, creeping around the edges of my thoughts. But the anger burned brighter, turning fear into fuel. Monday morning, I received my new assignment: temporary reassignment, process documentation, and training revision. Basically, they'd moved me to a meaningless project filing papers nobody would ever read. The email called it professional development and retraining opportunity. I smiled at my computer screen. This was the performance trap. Give me work so boring I'd quit out of frustration, or work so vague I'd fail, giving them another reason to push me out. But I wasn't going to quit, and I wasn't going to fail. I showed up to every meeting early. I smiled. I took notes. And I recorded everything on my phone, tucked in my jacket pocket. Colin stopped by twice that week with fake concern. "How are you adjusting, Mara? I know this isn't what you hoped for." "I'm learning a lot," I replied sweetly. "Really valuable experience." The confusion on his face lasted only a moment, but I caught it. He expected tears or anger, resignation or confrontation. Instead, I gave him nothing but calm professionalism. It rattled him more than any argument could have. The company's spring celebration filled the rooftop event space with forced laughter and cheap wine. Colin stood near the railing giving a speech about integrity and accountability, his voice carrying over the crowd. People clapped. Someone whistled. "Some people can't handle data accuracy," he joked, glancing my direction. "But that's why we have training programs." Laughter rippled through the group. I clapped too, smiling, my phone recording in my purse. When the speech ended, I walked past him to refill my drink. As I passed, I leaned close enough that only he could hear. "You'll regret that line." His smile faltered. Just for half a second, his confident mask cracked, and I saw genuine uncertainty flash across his face. He recovered quickly, but it was too late. I'd seen it. He was rattled. And rattled people make mistakes. 3 days later, Jude sent me an encrypted message through a secure app I'd never heard of. The file contained server access logs showing Colin had downloaded my entire project portfolio from an unauthorized device, a personal laptop not registered with IT. He'd copied everything, probably to make sure his alterations matched my style closely enough to seem authentic. Jude's message included a warning: he's already covering his tracks. Logs are set to auto-delete in 72 hours. Move fast. I exported everything immediately, saving copies in 3 different locations. The pattern was becoming clear. Colin wasn't just sabotaging me. He was preparing to erase all evidence that he'd ever touched my files. If I hadn't started collecting proof when I did, he would have succeeded completely. Nobody would have believed me. It would have been my word against a VP's reputation. I requested a meeting with Patricia in HR, bringing printed copies of everything. The timestamps, the edit history, the CCTV still showing Colin at the workstation. I laid it all on her desk, my hands surprisingly steady. She reviewed each page carefully, nodding with professional interest. Then she closed the folder. "I appreciate you bringing this to our attention, Mara. We'll let leadership handle it internally." Internally. My voice came out sharper than I intended. He falsified company records. He sabotaged an employee. That's not an internal matter. "These situations are delicate," she replied, her tone suggesting the conversation was over. "We have processes." I walked out realizing HR wasn't there to protect me. They were there to protect the company from liability. And Colin was more valuable to them than the truth. That night I wrote in my journal, the pen pressing so hard it nearly tore through the paper: "I'm done asking for fairness." 2 weeks later, a company-wide bulletin appeared in my inbox. Executive contract renewal, Colin Drake, VP of Operations. The board would vote next month on extending his contract for another 3 years, with expanded responsibilities and a significant raise. If that vote passed, he'd become practically untouchable. Senior leadership. Protected. Powerful. I stared at the announcement until the words blurred. This was my deadline. If I was going to act, it had to be before that vote. Once his contract renewed, any accusation against him would look like sour grapes from a disgruntled employee. The company would circle the wagons, and I'd be crushed in the process. I needed someone on the board who'd actually listen. Someone whose reputation mattered more than office politics. I pulled up the board member directory and found her name, Eleanor Price, senior advisor and former chief ethics officer. She'd once sent me an email praising my innovation on a compliance project. It was a thin thread, but it was all I had. Eleanor agreed to meet at her downtown office, away from company property. She was in her early 60s, silver hair pulled back, eyes that had seen every corporate game played. I laid out everything systematically. The altered reports, the access logs, the CCTV footage, the threatening email. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. If this is true, it's not just about him sabotaging you. It's about a VP willing to commit fraud to protect his ego. That's a liability to the entire organization. Will you help me? She paused. I'll arrange a confidential review session. You, Colin, and myself. I want to watch his reaction when you present this evidence face to face. If he's guilty, he'll show it. Hope flickered in my chest for the first time in weeks. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she said quietly. If we do this, there's no going back. For either of you. The meeting took place in a small conference room, neutral territory. Colin arrived 7 minutes late, carrying his leather portfolio and wearing his most expensive suit. He smiled at Eleanor, then at me, like we were all friends catching up. I appreciate you taking the time for this, he began smoothly. Mara's been struggling lately, and I want to make sure we're supporting her properly. I waited until he sat down. Then I opened my laptop. I'd like to discuss metadata, I said calmly. Colin's pupils flickered. Just a tiny reaction, but Eleanor caught it. I could see her registering the shift. Metadata, he laughed. Mara, we're here to talk about your development plan, not technical details. I think metadata is extremely relevant, I continued, especially when it shows who accessed my files and when. His smile tightened. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. The room felt smaller. Colin deflected, made a joke about me being too detail-oriented, but his voice had an edge now. When the meeting ended 20 minutes later, I knew I'd hit a nerve. And Eleanor knew something was wrong. 2 days after the meeting, my email archive showed something suspicious. An entire thread between Colin and me about my promotion timeline had vanished. 23 messages, including one where Colin had written, "Let's slow-roll Mara's progression. She's ambitious, but not ready for leadership visibility." But I'd anticipated this. Before turning over my laptop, I'd exported my entire mailbox to an external drive. I had every deleted message, every communication he thought he'd erased. He was covering his tracks, but he was doing it too late. The evidence was already beyond his reach. I started building a presentation. I called it the version you forgot. Each slide was a side-by-side comparison. His altered version next to my original. His metadata next to the CCTV timestamp. His fake concern next to his deleted emails admitting he wanted to hold me back. It was a mirror image of the presentation he'd used to humiliate me, but this time it told the truth. Aaron Dell, the chief financial officer, summoned me to his office with no explanation. I went prepared for another trap, but his expression stopped me. He looked tired and frustrated. "You have friends on the board now," he said quietly, sliding a printed schedule across his desk. "If you're going to act, make it decisive. Next week. Same boardroom." My hands trembled as I picked up the paper. It was the full agenda for the executive contract review meeting. Colin's renewal vote was scheduled for 10 a.m. My presentation would need to happen right before that vote. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. He looked out the window at the city skyline. "Because I've watched him do this to 3 other people. And I stayed quiet every time." He turned back to me. "I won't stay quiet again." I spent 72 hours rehearsing. Every slide transition, every sentence, every possible question they might ask. I practiced in front of my mirror, in front of my roommate, in front of my empty living room at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep. My presentation was 23 slides. Each one was a surgical strike. The night before the meeting, I slept for 2 hours. I arrived at the office at 6:30 a.m., wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to my first interview with his company. The boardroom was empty and dark. I connected my laptop to the projector and tested every slide twice. Colin arrived at 9:45 a.m., laughing with two other executives. He saw me sitting quietly in the corner and waved like we were colleagues without history. He had no idea what was coming. No idea that the same room where he destroyed my reputation was about to become the place where his career ended. The board settled into their seats. Colin stood near the projector, beginning his renewal speech about leadership and vision and driving growth. His voice was confident, practiced. 3 minutes in, I raised my hand. Before we continue, I'd like to show something. The board chair, a stern woman named Diane Cross, looked annoyed. Ms. Keaton, this is scheduled time for. It directly relates to Mr. Drake's performance, I interrupted, standing, and his fitness for contract renewal. Diane hesitated, then nodded once. I connected my laptop. The first slide appeared, side-by-side versions of the same report. One showing my actual data, one showing Colin's alterations. The room went silent. Colin laughed nervously. Mara, what is this? I clicked to the next slide. Access logs showing his username. Then the CCTV footage, timestamped March 14th, 11:47 p.m., showing him entering the office after hours. Then the metadata proving he'd edited my files 2 days before the presentation. That's the night my file was altered, I said calmly. Eleanor was nodding slowly. Diane's expression had turned to stone. Colin tried to recover. This is clearly a misunderstanding. I was reviewing team files, making corrections where needed. That's my job. I played the next slide. An audio recording from the rooftop party, his voice joking about employees who can't handle data accuracy. Then another recording from a meeting. We can't let her outshine leadership. It sets the wrong precedent. His face drained of color. Someone in the back row muttered something. Diane held up her hand for silence. Recess. 20 minutes. Mr. Drake, you'll remain available. I stepped outside as the board filed past me. Through the door, I heard Colin's voice rising, defensive and desperate. Then Eleanor's calm reply cutting through his excuses. The power dynamic I'd lived under for months was finally, undeniably reversed. And everyone in that room knew it. Patricia from HR found me in the hallway 2 hours later. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her hands shook slightly as she handed me a document. Settlement offer. Full reinstatement, promotion to senior director, and a substantial financial package in exchange for confidentiality. I read through the legalese. They'd give me everything I wanted. The title, the raise, the corner office. All I had to do was sign an NDA and pretend none of this ever happened. Make it all disappear quietly, like Renee said Mark from logistics had done. I almost signed. My pen hovered over the signature line. Then I looked up and saw Colin across the lobby, talking on his phone. He caught my eye and smirked. That tiny, arrogant smirk that said he thought I'd take the money and stay silent like everyone else. I put the pen down. No. Patricia blinked. I'm sorry. The truth matters more than convenience, I said. He sabotaged me, and he'll do it again to someone else. I'm not signing. I knew a journalist named Carla Vance who specialized in corporate accountability stories. We'd met at an industry conference 2 years ago. I sent her an encrypted file containing everything. The audit trail, the recordings, the CCTV footage, the deleted emails Colin thought he'd erased forever. I included a detailed timeline and contact information for Renee and Jude, if they were willing to speak. Within 48 hours, the headline appeared online. VP accused of tampering with employee records in scheme to block promotion. The article was thorough and devastating. By noon, it had been shared 11,000 times. By evening, 3 more employees had come forward with similar stories. The company released a vague statement about taking allegations seriously. Colin's LinkedIn profile went dark. His carefully curated professional image, built over 15 years, was crumbling in real time. And I felt nothing but cold satisfaction watching it happen. The announcement came 5 days later. Colin Drake's contract has been terminated, effective immediately. The press release called it a mutual decision. HR denied any knowledge of his actions. The CEO, Marjorie Vance, held a press conference calling it an isolated incident with one bad actor. But I knew better. I still had one final card left. Buried in the documents Renee had given me was an internal memo, dated 6 months earlier, signed by Marjorie herself. It authorized Colin to make necessary adjustments to employee performance records for consistency and optics ahead of board presentations. They'd known. Leadership had known and approved. Colin wasn't acting alone. He was doing exactly what they'd encouraged him to do, and now they were throwing him under the bus to protect themselves. I saved that memo in my Phoenix_archive, labeled clearly, waiting for the right moment. That moment came during the company's quarterly town hall, a mandatory all-hands meeting streamed live to every employee. Marjorie stood at the podium talking about integrity and moving forward. I waited until she opened the floor for questions. Then I sent the memo to every single employee email. All 847 people in the company received it simultaneously. Phones buzzed across the auditorium like a swarm of mechanical insects. People pulled out their devices. Whispers spread. Marjorie stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale as someone showed her a phone screen. The cameras were still rolling. The live stream was still broadcasting. Someone tried to cut the feed, but it was too late. The recording leaked within minutes, showing Marjorie frozen at the podium, unable to explain the document now burning through every inbox. By the next morning, both Marjorie and Colin were suspended pending external investigation. 6 weeks later, I walked through the same glass hallways, but they felt different. Portraits of Colin and Marjorie had been quietly removed. New leadership was coming in, promising transparency. Eleanor had been named interim CEO, and she'd offered me a position leading the new data ethics and integrity department. I accepted, but only after negotiating terms that protected me. Independent reporting structure, board-level access, and one non-negotiable condition, a sealed envelope in the company safe, labeled Phoenix_archive, release if silenced. If anything ever happened to me, if I was pushed out or pressured to leave, that envelope's contents would automatically go public. The last scene showed me standing in my new office, window overlooking the city. The envelope sat in the safe behind my desk, insurance against history repeating itself. Revenge wasn't the goal. Truth was. But sometimes, the quiet ones only get heard when they burn bright enough to light the entire room on fire. And I'd made sure my fire would keep burning long after they tried to put it out.